Today I read a really fascinating article in New York Times Magazine by Francesca Mari called The Renter's Utopia, which is all about how a public housing initiative in Vienna allowed for the amount that renters spent on housing to become such an insignificant part of their budget that they were able to drastically reinvent and recreate their lives economically. Because unlike the US, they weren't kept in crushing debt and spending 30% or more of their paychecks on livable, affordable housing. The quote I want to read you is this: "To American eyes, the whole Viennese setup can appear fancifully socialistic, but set that aside, and what's mind-boggling is how social housing gives the economic lives of the Viennese an entirely different shape. Imagine if your housing expenses were more like the Schachingers. Imagine having to think about them the same degree that you think about your restaurant choices or your streaming service subscriptions. Imagine, too, where the rest of your income might go if you spent much less of it on housing." Vienna invites us to envision a world in which home ownership isn't the only way to secure a certain future. The author goes on to talk about how covering the housing crisis in the United States is naturally very horrifying and extremely depressing. But something that caught my eye was that many of her friends are still buying rental properties in states they will never visit and neighborhoods they will never occupy themselves because, quote, she says, "the math is hard to argue with." This is where I feel we as a society have completely lost our collective morality. Even if something is a great economic opportunity, that doesn't mean it's ethical. This is the same thing with hoarding wealth, becoming a billionaire. What she is describing is exploiting poor communities here and basically participating in the system that she has spent the whole article condemning. Now, she's definitely not saying that she agrees with what her friends are doing, but she's giving the sort of logic that they justify their actions by, which is that, well, it's just easy money. When things are easy money, it's often because of the exploitation of workers, because of the exploitation of people who don't have the economic means, the ability, or the resources to leave neighborhoods in which their rent is constantly being raised and in which they are drowning in chronic debt. So by purchasing one of those asset properties where you're able to essentially become a landlord, all you're doing is participating in the exploitation of vulnerable people. And that money, I would argue, is blood money. One of the ways that we get out of this housing crisis is stand up to objectionable actions that we feel are morally wrong. If you're a person of means, instead of buying an asset property in a low-income neighborhood, why don't you use that money and give it to someone who needs it, like, say, mutual aid groups? There's an awesome organization that my best friend Nyanda taught me about called Give Directly. You can give money directly to a specific person or family, helping them meet their basic needs and giving them the stability to climb out of crushing debt. I think that's a much better use of your money than buying an asset property in a low-income neighborhood. Just my 2 cents.